Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Heart Breathings. I am actually like knee deep in Post-it notes and planning for Q4. But before we dive into the goodness and fun of Preptober and NaNoWriMo and all the lovely things of fall, I did want to leave you with one final How to Plan a Series Q&A. So I'll be starting off from the second set of questions that I received. And like I said, I'm sorry I'm not going to get to answer every single question that came through. I tried to stick to the ones that seemed to be series specific, although we will get into some marketing stuff today that's going to be really fun to talk about. So let's jump in. So are there reader expectations in different genres regarding how time passes from one book to another inside the fictional world for the characters? For example, I'm writing a romance series with a new couple featured in each book. At the moment, I'm planning to have each book take place in the next season that follows. So book 1 in winter, book 2 in spring, etc. I assume that's fine as long as this is consistent throughout the series. I'm asking if it matters and what are the rules of thumb. So when it comes to how time passes inside your series, most of the readers in every series are going to be expecting time to pass chronologically. So if you have a book that is in winter for book 1 and spring in book 2, you just want to make sure that it's the very next season, which it sounds like that's what you're planning to do. It doesn't matter if it's been 3 months or even 6 months between books when it comes to romances. I think it's fine for time to pass, whatever is natural for your characters and whatever that next couple needs to get them into place. So it would be totally fine if the next book picked up right away, and then if you waited 6 months for the next book to come in terms of what's happening inside the story world. So I think with romances, it's just what's appropriate. With dynamic series where you've got maybe a cliffhanger ending or something like that, most readers are going to expect that next book to pick up immediately from where you left them or very soon thereafter. But the main rule of thumb is that things are chronological so that as things progress in the story or in your town or in your story world in some way, readers are able to follow that chronologically. And that's really the biggest rule of thumb. When it comes to romances like the one you're talking about though, my biggest warning for you, if you're planning to do one in winter, one in spring, one in summer, one in fall, is to start out a little bit ahead so that you can really plan those releases to be pretty consistent. Because if you get a little bit behind and now your spring book isn't coming out until fall and your fall book is coming out in the summer, it can start to feel a little bit off. Of course, once the books are all out, it's not really going to matter which season they came out in, and readers are used to reading books of all seasons in all seasons. So that is not going to matter as much, but when it comes to timing those releases, if you're making the seasons part of your launch strategy and part of the overall feel of the series, I would start out a little bit ahead so that you don't get in a situation where you get off on your seasons and you can't catch back up. Another warning that I have for that scenario is if you're starting book 1 in winter, some of my biggest advice to people is don't start off your whole series with a seasonal book like a holiday book. So don't start with a Christmas book because your first book in your series is going to become your biggest marketing tool when it comes to bringing new readers into your series. And a Christmas book just isn't going to sell as well in February and March and July as just a regular romance novel that wasn't based on a seasonal theme. So that's my biggest warning there is don't start with a Christmas book. Don't start with a novella. Start with a full-length book that is not based on a seasonal theme that will be popular during one time of the year rather than another. Regular book that just happens to be in winter, no problem. Christmas book can get tricky. Should you set up an LLC or sole proprietorship when you start, or wait to set up an LLC when your books start making money, for example, $5,000 or more per month? So again, this is not really a series specific question. This is more of just a self-publishing question. And I will say, I go into depth in this on my Publish and Thrive course. So if you really want to get deep into this kind of stuff, hang out until February and we can discuss it in greater detail along with all the things you need to set up your business. But I did want to just touch on this, that the main types of businesses you will see authors in the US start when they're starting their self-publishing business is you have a sole proprietorship. You don't usually have to do much to set that up or anything. It's just an automatic business designation. And there's no real difference between a sole proprietorship and an LLC when it comes to how your money is taxed. What the difference usually is the level of liability that you have personally to your business. So if you're a sole proprietor, you are fully liable for everything your business does and everything you do as a writer in your personal life. When you set up an LLC, you have a little bit of limited liability there when it comes to separation between your personal assets and your business assets. But basically, your tax is treated the same. Then you do have some people that will set up a DBA, which is a doing business as, which is basically just like a fictional business name. Again, doesn't provide you any tax benefits, but does give you a little bit of privacy or a little bit more of like a professional nature to your business name. But then the one thing that some authors will do when they start making more money is they will set up an S Corp designation to their LLC. If you're listening to this and you're like, this makes no sense to me, what you'll want to do instead of just listening to my advice is go and talk to an accountant, because I can't legally give you advice on what is the best way to set up your business. And it's just a good idea when you're starting your own business to really talk to an accountant. It's not that expensive. Talk to somebody who knows about online businesses or specifically digital online businesses and this sort of thing, and go from there. But it's so important to understand which one is the best for you. I will tell you that my accountant told me early on that I should go ahead and start an LLC just to have that business going. And then once I started making $40,000, $50,000, he suggested I start an LLC that's an S Corp designation. And that was what I did, and it has worked out great for me. But again, you'll want to do what your accountant recommends that you do or what's best for your personal situation. And it can also really vary depending on what state you live in terms of what's best for you. So definitely check out those different types of businesses and see what feels best for you. But just keep in mind that a sole proprietorship puts all the personal liability on you, whereas an LLC puts a little bit of separation there between your personal liability and your business liability. So there was someone here that says, would really love more information about setting up a wiki for your series Bible, mainly linking, like linking your characters and books and places, etc. So I'm going to just barely touch on this here to say that I'm very excited to get into a new type of series wiki. So in the past, I've talked about using one on pbworks.com. I'm actually starting a wiki, and pretty much all of my business stuff, now that I have an assistant, is going to be set up inside Notion. And I realized that you can do wikis inside Notion. So it's not something I'm going to talk about here, but I will tell you that coming up, I will be doing a full walkthrough of setting up my new wiki inside Notion. So I'm going to be setting up a wiki for my book, The Witch's Key, and for that whole series before I start working on book 2. So I will carry you through the process and show you real life examples of how you link all of those things together. So make sure you're subscribed if you're interested in seeing how I create my series Bible inside a wiki, because I will be covering it in detail. Another good question here that I could probably talk about for hours. If you were just starting out today and planning on self-publishing a series, how would you go about doing it? Would you rapid release? How often? How many books? What kind of marketing would you do? Thanks so much. I love your channel. Thank you for this question. I will say that there is so much nuance to launching your career, figuring all these things out. So there is a lot more to say about this, and maybe we'll touch on some of this later. I definitely go into depth on this in my Publish and Thrive course. But to answer your question, if I was just starting out today, I would first make the choice of whether you planned long-term to be exclusive to Amazon inside their Kindle Unlimited exclusive program, or wide, which means that you're going to publish at all the different vendors, Apple, Google, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. I personally am a huge fan of publishing wide because I think that it is safer and just a better long-term experience to have your books available everywhere rather than giving Amazon sole control over your entire career and all of your income. But that's going to be a personal decision that you'll have to make for yourself, and I support authors who choose whichever way works best for them. I personally, if I was starting out, I would go wide because that would be my long-term goal, to be available in as many places as possible for as many readers as possible, and to make sure that I don't have all my eggs in one basket, so to speak. But there can be different launch strategies based on Kindle Unlimited versus wide. So I'm just going to talk about what I would do personally, which is go wide, make my books widely available so they're available on all platforms. And I would probably start with a book series that was going to be at least 5 to 10 books long. I think that trilogies can be fun to write, but when it comes to launching your first thing, the longer the series, the more you're going to be able to hook people and bring them in. With a trilogy or something short, you're going to just have barely started to build momentum when you're starting something new. And starting a new series can pull some readers over, but you'll also lose readers. Whereas when you have a series that's building momentum, which you should be building momentum by book 3 or 4, you want to keep that going for as long as possible. So I personally would plan probably a 6 to 10 book series. And I would start out with book 1, and then book 2 would come out probably about 6 weeks to 2 months later. And then book 3 also following on its heels 6 weeks to 2 months later. So I would keep those first 3 books pretty rapid release. It's not as rapid release as people who are releasing books every 3 weeks, but I know that for myself, that's not going to be sustainable and it's not going to be healthy for me to try to publish that fast. So it's just my personal preference. 2 months is still pushing it. So I would probably write those first 2 books before I started publishing. So I'd have 2 books under my belt, publish the first one. While I was waiting to publish book 2, I would be writing book 3. And I would try to always stay about a book ahead. I also, before I started publishing, would probably start gathering some sort of, or start building some sort of author platform. So Instagram, a Facebook page, a website, start building a newsletter list, even before I started publishing. Then as soon as I published book 1, I would make sure that I had some kind of place and reason to encourage people to sign up for my newsletter list. So in the back of the book, I would say, if you loved this book, book 2 is coming on XYZ date. Sign up for my newsletter list to get a special sneak peek of chapter 1 and get people involved in that list. Because the sooner you can start getting people onto your newsletter list, the better, because that's how you're going to tell them about your book too. When I first started my career, I launched my first book at 99 cents and my second book at 99 cents. And I think this was a good call for me back then because there was no place to really advertise. If I was starting now though, I would put that first book probably at $2.99 or $3.99. So I would build that author platform, get my newsletter in place, make sure that I have my website good to go, and then I would release book 1. I probably wouldn't spend personally a lot of time or money trying to get a big launch plan going for book 1. Instead, I would focus on making sure book 2 was ready to go. Maybe I would do a pre-order on book 2, but I'm not 100% certain. I would have to kind of think through my strategy there. But whenever book 2 was ready to come out, I would release it, let's say 6 weeks later. At that point, I would drop book 1 to 99 cents for just a short period of time and use this as my loss leader so that readers will take a chance on this new series for only $1. And I would probably stack some ads, maybe try some Facebook ads and some Bargain Booksy and other type of deal sites ads just for a week or 2 and stack them all together, bring as many new readers into my series as possible, and make sure the back matter of book 1 leads them directly to book 2 with a direct link that says, book 2 is out now, come and get it, come buy it. Some kind of tagline that entices them. You know, if you love Harper's story, she's got new secrets, come see what happens in book 2. Something like that with a link to go buy it on the specific platform where they purchased book 1. Then after about a week or 2, I would raise the price of book 1 back up to full price and be focused on getting book 3 ready for publication. When book 3 came out 6 weeks later, I would do the same process. Lower book 1 to 99 cents and use that as the loss leader, the magnet that pulls people in, directly send them to book 2 and then on to book 3. Make sure along the way that I'm trying to get them onto my newsletter list so that as soon as a new book comes out, I've got a large list or a growing list to launch that book to let them know the book is out. I would just rinse and repeat basically. Book 1 comes back up to full price, but this time After those first 3 books have come out pretty fast back to back, I would probably take a little bit more time for book 4. This is a personal preference. Some people will say, get those books out as fast as you can. I say, get those books out in a way that is sustainable for you, not only for your mental health, but for your quality of writing. So write the best books you can as fast as you can. But since we did talk earlier about series fatigue, pay attention to that and understand that if you start writing that series really, really fast, you might hit a stage of burnout and then you're going to need a really long break. So think about that when you're planning your strategy. So for me, after book 3's release, I would probably plan the next book, book 4, for maybe 3 to 4 months later. Do the same process of driving as many sales to book 1 as possible, advertising my new release to my current readers, and then continue that process all the way through. I would definitely stick with one series, one genre at a time until I had a good, strong email list and a good base behind me. And that's where I would focus my time and my money and my energy. If you were to look at audio, would you rather wait until finished all books or risk a different VA? And I'm assuming VA means voice actor. So I really don't have many audiobooks. I only have 3 audiobooks, and I do use the same voice actor for all 3, and I did produce those after the whole series almost was completed. If I were to start a new series and I was looking at audio, it is something I hear from my friends time and time again, that if you can put out that audiobook as close to the launch of the ebook and paperback, you're going to sell more books. So I think that if I were looking at audio, I would try my best to time the release of the audiobook with the release of the book. Now, you can't do that with backlists because those books, launch has come and gone. But if it was a new series, I would try to line them up as much as possible. But like I said, I don't have a lot of experience with audiobooks, so you might get better information from someone like Joanna Penn, who does have a lot of audiobooks, or maybe even Mark Dawson, who I believe also has all of his books in audio. How do you accurately, respectfully, and intentionally write with inclusivity and diversity? So this is a really tough question, and I think it's something important that we all need to be thinking about, because I think that a lot of writers lean heavily on our own experience, as well as stereotypes we don't even know we have, biases we don't even have, and we work within the limitations of our own minds, our own experience, the lens that we see the world with. So what we're all kind of waking up to these days is an understanding that if we are going to write with inclusivity and make sure that we are being fair and sensitive to all races and types of people, then we need to make sure that our writing reflects that. I think that I don't have an amazing answer to this, other than the fact that you're already aware that you want to write this way is a big step forward. So I can even look back at some of my past books and I think, is that the best way that I could have had to write that? Did I write that more stereotypical than I should have? So I think it's really a matter of awareness and education. So reaching out to authors who teach courses. There are going to be probably even more courses coming up on this. There are several courses taught through RWA and other writing groups that are all about diversity and inclusivity. I know that a lot of authors are actually very nervous to write more diverse characters that don't look like you or talk like you or have your same experiences, because you don't want to get it wrong. And I think that that's a good thing to be aware of. But I also think that if you know you want to include more diversity in your writing, it's good to really question yourself along the way, do some reading with other books that are about these types of diverse characters. Make sure that you're running your book through a diverse set of beta readers, asking specifically for them to take a look at this. For example, I have a book about a Native American legend that is totally made up. It's fantasy, but it does go based on the idea of spirit walkers in Native American culture. And my heroine is Native American. So I reached out to a couple of Native American teens and had them read through the book. They helped me make some changes. So I think that reaching out to the community and getting as much information as you can But I think we're going to be seeing some boundaries pushed with this. And I think the main thing you can do is just be open and aware and try your best to question your own limitations, your own biases that you might be writing into things, and make sure that when you craft these characters, you're doing it out of love instead of just a knee-jerk reaction to what you've seen on TV or the way some other people have been portrayed in past books or movies that you've watched before. This is going to be a growing topic, and the more I learn about it, the more I hope that I can share with you. But I'm glad that you asked the question, and I think the best we can do is just continue to be aware and educate ourselves. Can you show an example or create a template for the style guide? So I will show you an example of one that was given back to me for my book Forgotten Darkness from my editor Faith Williams at the Atwater Group. So let me show you that real quick, and this will give you a good idea of what a style guide might look like. So this is just an example from my own book, and this is a style sheet that I got from my editor, Faith, at the Atwater Group. And so this is 20 pages for my book, Forgotten Darkness. If you are currently reading through the Demon series with me, then just understand that some of this might be spoilers, so just be careful or fast forward a little bit if you don't want to be spoiled on some of this. But she basically lists the character name, anything that I said about that character in previous books or in this book itself, what color hair she has, what color eyes she has, any other type of thing that we need to know about her, things she's done in her past, or things that she's a senior in high school, or she spent her life in the foster care system, what relationships she has to other people. And so this first part is about the different characters that are the main characters that you see in the series. So the reason this is a great thing to get from your editor is that she can then look at this next time, or when I'm writing the next book in the series, I can look back at this as well, and I can see what details were part of this. So I can use this to actually add to my series Bible, and these are the types of things that you would see in a series Bible. So it would let you know the name of characters, and she even goes into side characters and other recurring characters who are not POV characters. So you get pretty much any type of comparison, like this person's in the same prison as Airden, or they're tall, or they have black eyes, and this sort of thing. So later when I come back to writing the next book in the series, I can say, what was the name of that prison guard? Oh, okay, his name was Karn, and he was the mean guy who picked on the weak. And you can see kind of what chapter or what part of the book that was mentioned in. Then you can see down on these further pages, she gets into mentioning locations. So Priestess Winter's home is called Winter Haven, and there's no description here that I've given because this was something from a previous book. But if she had edited all of my books, she would have this in the style guide as well. So Brighton Manor, or Northern Kingdom is ruled by Leah's father, and so on. So we know a lot about all of these different places and locations. Then we also have a list of all of the names of chapters and whose point of view those chapters are in, which page they start, and so on, how many pages are in each chapter. And that's just good to have for reference. And then later here, she also has some notes on notes that she made inside my book, and an explanation of why I might want to change it and what she suggests. So based on this, I would suggest capitalizing Little Miss rules, and so on. So these are all like annotations from the manuscript itself and why she would make these stylistic changes. Then there are also some sort of style things for word uses that I say fairy tale is 2 words or ice pick is 1 word. And she's saying it should be 2 words, not 1. So just kind of spelling errors and other things. Word choice, further instead of farther. So this is just her not only telling me that it needs to change, but a really great editor will tell you why. So that as the writer, you can now learn and you can say, oh, okay, now I understand the difference between further and farther and why I need to use it differently. So this is not only helping me make the book better, but it's actually teaching me so that when I write the next book, it will be a better book. Those are the kinds of things that you will find and see here on the locations and stuff like that. You see how words are capitalized. So this is just an example of my style sheet that I got from my editor, and I highly recommend finding an editor if you can who provides one of these. So another question that I had was, are short 3 to 4K shorts sellable? So yes and no. It somewhat depends on the genre and whether you're very good at writing them. So I would say that the biggest challenge that you might have with short stories, like 3 to 4,000 words, is pricing, because they're super short. So you can charge 99 cents for them, and some people are willing to pay $1 for them, and that's fine. But it might be a stretch to expect people to pay $3, $4, or $5 for a single 4,000 word short without them feeling like they kind of got ripped off. One of the things you'll see a lot of authors do if they love to write short stories and they want to write them all in a theme or based on a single world, or just bundle all of their short stories together, is they'll create an anthology of their short stories. Then you can charge a full-length novel price for a handful of those short stories, and then readers feel like they got what they paid for. One of the big exceptions to this, of course, is erotic romance. Erotic romance shorts sell much better than most other types of genres because what the reader is looking to get from them is very different than what a reader is coming to a mystery series or something like that to get. So you need to think about your audience, but I really feel like if you wanted to create an entire career based on just selling 3 to 4,000 word shorts, you could absolutely do it, because that's the beauty of indie, is everything is sellable. There's an audience for just about anything you could want to do out there. If you decide this is what you want to do, is you're really good at shorts and this is what you love to write, then just come up with a strategy, create a price, be willing to experiment. And then I would highly suggest that once you have 3, 4, 5, 10 under your belt, you begin boxing them up into anthologies or sets so that you can charge a higher price for them and hopefully get readers more enticed to buy the whole set and feel like they're getting a deal rather than just buying one at a time. But I think they're absolutely sellable, particularly in erotic fiction, but in all types of fiction, I think you could make it work if they were really good. That being said, I don't particularly have any friends that's like all they write, and I wouldn't recommend putting 3 or 4,000 word short stories into your series like as book 3 or book 4 when you had full-length series before that, full-length books before that. So if you're going to sell short stories, I would come up with a specific strategy and stick to that rather than trying to like sneak them in as a book 3 or a book 5. Some of the different vendors will allow you to make a short story like a 0.5, like it's 2.5 in your series, but not all of them. So to stay consistent, I would recommend just keeping the short stories out of your main series. So my friend Vivian, you guys might know her here from YouTube, she said how to make a series arc long enough for 6+ books. I know that this is a challenge for a lot of people. I think that what you need to start thinking about when you want to write, like you want to write a bigger series, is you've got to start thinking of a bigger story. So think about who your character is at the beginning of the story, and then think about who they need to become by the end of it and what types of challenges can you put in their way so that it's going to take them naturally 5, 6 or more books to get to that final villain. So think about the Harry Potter series, for example. When you have that very first book, you've got a big introduction to Harry and the world and everything there, but you also get introduced to this really big series arc. And you know all this history now about Voldemort, but you also know that he's back, but he's not quite powerful enough, and Harry's not powerful enough either. So as the series progresses, you have the villain beginning to gather his tribe together again and his strength, but you also have Harry gathering his tribe and his strength. And so it becomes this race to see who's going to be strong enough in the end. And will Harry become strong enough and skilled enough by the time Voldemort is fully powerful, or will Voldemort beat him and then all is lost? So you have those stakes set up right from the beginning. When it comes to a young adult series like that or a middle grade series, it is pretty common or popular to have either one big villain or an overarching sort of organization or something like that. And each book provides a different piece of the puzzle, but every book brings your heroine or hero closer to that final confrontation. So I think when you're trying to make sure that you have enough content for 5, 6 or more books, you really need to think about what's the long long game here, not just what happens in this first book or what's the world that my character lives in, but what's the overarching villain? What's the big bad? What's the stakes of this world? What's the worst thing that could happen? And how will my character need to grow? How can I make this big bad thing or person or organization so bad that it's going to take my character that many books just to become strong enough and to gather the tools and resources they need to defeat this villain? With my Shadow Demon saga, it all starts very small and you're just starting to learn about the Order of Shadows, and then you find out the Order of Shadows is bigger than you thought, and then it's bigger than you thought, and the world just continues to grow. So if you can create a world that has these layers, like kind of like an onion, that can help you too. But it's just having some kind of overarching conflict or stakes in the world that's just going to take time to resolve. Can you talk about a series like Are You Afraid of the Dark? It's Contained. Are those popular? So I had to go and look this up because it seemed familiar to me, but I wasn't sure. And here's what Wikipedia says. This spooky anthology series for kids recounts ghost stories told by the young members of the Midnight Society as they gather around a campfire. Each episode opens with members of the Midnight Society at their secret spot in the woods where they prepare their fire, and the night's storyteller announces the title of his or her offering. However, the cameras soon leave the storyteller and switch to the tale being told. So this sounds kind of like the Twilight Zone or anything where you have kind of this framing device where you have something happening here and then this person's telling the story or this person introducing a story, but every story kind of stands alone. I think that this can work, but I haven't really seen it be very popular in written fiction in this way. So maybe you see it more in sort of middle grade or kids books, but I haven't seen a specific series like this. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I would say in terms of what is the most popular thing that indies are writing in terms of series, this is not something that I have seen done before with this particular type of framing device. Like I said, that doesn't mean it wouldn't be popular, but it's definitely not something that I've seen done before. And if you guys have some examples of someone who is writing in this way, where every story stands alone, but there's some kind of like framing device or something that pulls it all together, maybe at the beginning and end of the book, then please leave those examples down below. I will say that one of the biggest ways that you can find success in an indie career when you're self-publishing is to make your books as interconnected as possible. The more a reader can get immersed in this world and then have to read the next book to find out what happens, or they've got to get to that next book to find out about the heroine's brother that they fell in love with and they want to see who he falls in love with. The more you can really tie those books together, the faster you're going to find success in this business, is what I have seen from personal experience and from watching everyone else. So when you have something that is like very disconnected, I think you're going to struggle a little bit more than someone who had a series that was super interconnected. So the more you can create that framing device that really pulls them all together and then make every story a similar type of feeling for your reader, the better off you're going to be. But in general, just keep in mind that the more interconnected your series are, the more they depend on each other, or the more you really hook that reader in and make them want to read the next book, the better off you're going to be in terms of sales. Not specific to a series, but hints on finding a writer's group online or in real life. I know this is a tricky thing. People ask about this sort of thing all the time. How do I find a writer's group? How do I find a critique group? How do I find beta readers? And all I can say is just become part of the community you want to be a part of. So start following writers' hashtags on Instagram. Join Facebook groups like my sprinting group. It's so important also to try to join local writer groups if you can find them. Depending on where you live, that might be really easy or it might be really hard, but get yourself out of that shell and just start joining some of these groups. Start participating in writing sprints. Join an RWA group or a national group that is full of writers. But the more you can start hanging out with writers, try NaNoWriMo. It's coming up soon. There are local regions for all of the regions, and there are lots of online groups where people are wanting to exchange stories or encourage each other throughout the writing process. That's how I found my best two critique groups of my career. One was through RWA, and I just started going to meetings and starting getting involved in the community. met some people, said, hey, let's critique together. Another writing group that I joined, I met through NaNoWriMo, and this was an amazing experience. But you can't just expect those experiences to come to you. You have to go and seek them out. And when you start creating and developing relationships with other writers, then you can start saying, hey, do you want to switch some chapters, and find people who are in similar place to you in terms of where they are in their career and their skill level and how long they've been writing, and then just start engaging in those relationships. See if they want to join a writer's group with you. I know that there can be sometimes services that will pair you up with people as well. So like Camp NaNoWriMo, you can get added to a cabin, or you might find a critique group through like your local RWA group. But I often find that the most successful types of writer groups are the ones where you just started getting involved and started communicating with people, started reaching out and saying hi, and then it just happens organically. Do you prefer the same beta readers for the whole series or fresh eyes each book? Definitely the same beta readers for the whole series. First of all, I need beta readers who can help me stay consistent. So it would do me no good, especially because I write a dynamic series, to have a beta reader start at book 8 who necessarily hadn't read the first few books several times. So my current beta readers have been with me for years, not since the beginning of my series 10 years ago, but when I met them, they had already read up to my current book, and they had read them several times. What you really ideally want in a beta reader, especially for a dynamic series, is someone who is going to be willing to say, this doesn't feel right for me, because they know your characters, they know your writing style, and they're going to tell you more than just, this book was great. They're going to actually tell you what needs to change, what didn't resonate for them, what didn't feel good, sentences that were clunky, storylines that didn't appeal to them. They're going to tell you all those things, and they need to be familiar with your writing style, what typical readers of your books are used to and enjoy. And they're going to need to know more about the previous books in the series. Now, if you're writing standalone romances or like standalone psychological thrillers or horrors, it might be less important to have the same beta readers. But even then, I would personally prefer to have the same beta readers, because they're going to help me stay consistent with not only the details, like weren't his eyes blue in the last book and that kind of thing, but also consistency in my style, in my tone. Like, whoa, this book got way darker than the last one. Are you sure you want to do that? This book is so much sexier than the last one. I loved it. Or, whatever it may be. But I think that when you have betas who are familiar with all of your previous books, they're going to typically give better feedback than fresh eyes. If, however, you are writing something that is a little bit outside of your norm and you think your ideal reader might be a little bit different, like say this is a darker book than normal, it could be beneficial to reach out to someone with fresh eyes and say, this is something you haven't read before. I know you haven't read my books before, but I want to know what someone who isn't familiar with my work thinks of this. And that can be beneficial. Or, for example, when I was writing book 7 of my series, I wanted it to be another entry point at the time. So I reached out to someone who was totally fresh beta reader and asked them to read the book and give me feedback on whether they understood what was happening or if I hadn't given enough details. So there might be specific reasons you might seek out fresh eyes, but in general, I prefer to use the same beta readers. How do you end a series or plan the completion of it? It's hard to end a series, especially a really long one. I have only ever ended 2 series in my career. Everything else is still kind of in process, and I'm currently writing the final book in 1 series, and then I have 2 books to go in my main long series, and it is really tough. So some of the best advice that I would have for you, especially if it's a pretty long series, is you need to start planning for that end several books in advance. So my main series is going to have 12 books, but I've been setting up the end of this series for the past couple of books already, and I've been looking ahead. So make sure you've got some of that pre-planning so that you can do some foreshadowing. You can set up the players like a big old chessboard. Also, when you start getting toward those last few books, You need to make sure that readers are emotionally prepared. They know that this is kind of coming to an end so they can start to feel the tension. You also will want to go back through your series and make a list of what I would call story threads. Any little loose ends that haven't been tied up, any story questions that never got answered, things that seemed to start and never went anywhere, little details like that. And start putting together an idea of what you want to close out, what threads you want to knot off and finish, what things are just going to be left to question, and how you want to make it all come together. It really is kind of like master planning some kind of large art project that you want to make sure that you have all of the pieces in play so that you can bring it all together. It would really suck to get to the end of book 12 and then have 5 or 6 questions that you didn't even consider that were started earlier in the series that you never tied off. It may not be possible for you to bring everything to a neat, pretty bow tie at the end, but you want to make decisions about what you are going to tie off, what you are going to answer, and what isn't going to get answered. So that's probably my best advice, but hopefully I will have even more advice for you once I do finish my big series about how to finish it well. But yeah, I think when you're planning the completion of a series, the best thing you can do is just go back and read the whole series over and make sure you're making detailed notes about every story thread that isn't answered or that was left hanging, and make sure you tie up as many of those loose ends as possible. I think when it comes to the end of a series too, you want that epic feel. You want to really think about who has my character become through the end of this series, and what type of feeling do I want to leave the reader with? How do I want to end this character's story? What do they need to overcome, and just how epic can I make it feel, and how can I really drive home the emotion of all that they have been through? So that's something else that I think comes heavy into the planning part of it, is really thinking about the character arc and making sure that it feels satisfactory for a character people have been following potentially for years. I'm struggling with the second book in my first series. I feel like this second book struggle is common. Any tips? So I think that there are a couple of reasons why people struggle with their second book. First, that first book is all about exploration. It's fun, it's exciting, you're getting into the story, and a lot of the story is potentially introductory, exploratory. It's really fun. You're discovering the world just like your character's discovering it for the first time. And so that carries a lot of the plot of the book. When you get into the second book, though, you have to start figuring out, what is this whole series about? Not just how do I introduce my readers to this world, but what is this all about? What are the stakes? How is this going to tie in and build a bridge? And it just naturally starts to get harder, especially with a dynamic series. Every single book gets a little bit harder because the content depends on what you wrote previously, and it starts to just build into this one huge story. So my biggest tips for you are to really sit down and start thinking not only about what happened in the first book, but where you want to go. Not just what is happening in book 2, but where am I taking this character in book 3 and 4? And a lot of times that is going to spark some new ideas like, oh, I need to set this up. I need to bring in this other new character. And it's going to start helping you put those pieces of the puzzle together. Because also, another thing is, depending on if you've published that first book or not, but sometimes we create that first book in a bubble and we've got all this creative energy and we don't know if it's going to sell, and there's all this excitement, but we're also like not receiving any criticism. We're not looking at sales numbers and judging ourselves. It's just all potential at that point. But once you start moving toward publishing that first book, that puts a whole new kind of pressure on book 2 of, wow, now I've gotten reviews and some people didn't like this character, or they didn't like these choices, or I haven't sold as many books as I thought. And it starts to add these doubts. And so my other big tip for you, if you're struggling with book 2, is to try to block out all of those doubts and put yourself back in the excitement that you had before you started publishing, or before you started getting feedback, or started feeling like you were building something so big. Try to just loosen it up a little bit and get back to the joy of of writing instead of all the pressure of I'm writing a series, and take it one step at a time and just say, I'm just writing this book, and it doesn't have to be the best book ever written. It's just book 2 of a series, and I'm going to have super fun with it. Put yourself back in that place of feeling when you first discovered this character or you first started thinking about this world. That's going to help a lot. So hopefully those tips, I know that's just like the tip of the iceberg, but I think that pressure and the difficulty of how does this fit in are probably the 2 main things that hold people back on book 2. So just take a deep breath, try to get yourself back in that joy space and let go of the pressure, but also think ahead. Where's this going? And start getting yourself excited again about where this book 2 fits in the grand tapestry of this whole series, and see if that sparks some new and fresh excitement for the whole thing. What's your preferred lead-in? A magnet, a prequel, a 99-cent book 1, or a free book 1? So this is really situational. So I think a magnet is a great thing to use to get people onto your newsletter list. So this is usually something that is either a short story that's connected to your main series, or something that your current people that have loved your series but haven't quite signed up for your list. So that's a great way to lead people onto your list with a magnet. I personally haven't used one yet, but I do plan to write one for next year. Prequel has not usually been my thing. I find that, especially if you're using it as your magnet or the thing that pulls people in, I find that prequels don't work really well. Prequels usually are better for fan service. So it's something that people that already love your series, they already love your world, find really interesting to go back and see the before stuff. So after I finished book 6 of my main series, I did kind of go back and write a prequel story, a story about Jackson back in the Shadow World. And this is more of like a fan service kind of thing. Not all of my readers pick it up, but the diehard core readers love it because they love seeing that sort of life of Jackson before he came to the human world. And so I find that prequels are things to keep readers' interest and to get them deeper into the world. But for me, as a reader and as a writer, I haven't found that to be a great lead-in. 99-cent book 1 is a great loss leader. I don't think that 99 cents as a permanent price works super well in today's market. I think 99 cent works well as a pulse price, a price that you do as a loss leader when you have a new release to promote the whole series and for a limited period of time. It can work great like that, especially when you only have 2, 3, 4 books in your series. When it comes to being wide and you're not in Kindle Unlimited and you've got starting to have 5, 6 books in your series, I like perma-free, and that is my preferred lead-in, and it is what I would use every single time once I have 5 or 6 books in a series. If I'm only doing a trilogy, I don't know for sure that I would ever do a permanently free book. We're going to try it a little bit with my Eternal Sorrow series coming up, and I'm going to experiment with that. But in general, when it's a trilogy or it's a shorter series or you only have 3 or 4 books, 99 cent works great as a temporary loss leader to promote a new release or to promote the whole series. But free is by far, I think, the most powerful thing that you can use as an indie who is wide once you have 4 or 5 books plus in your series. Now, I will say it doesn't mean you have to use free. I have several friends who've never had free books and they utilize that kind of pulse pricing strategy with 99 cent books on book 1, and it works great for them. But for me personally, free has changed my life, and I love using free books as a huge draw for my readers. And it works out as kind of an even exchange. I give them a free book for their free time, and if they love it, then they can continue on and buy. And that has worked wonders for my career, but it's like I said, there's no one path fits all. Is it okay to just put the first book free or on sale when you have a new release? So that kind of piggybacks on the last question, and this is actually the last question of the series Q&A. So yes, it's totally fine to only set your book 1 free or on sale when you have a new release. And that actually is a really great strategy to bring in new readers when you have a new release later in the series. And I talk about this a lot in Publish and Thrive, that it is really one of the most used strategies by indie authors, that when you have a new release, you take book one of your series and you either set it free or you set it to a sale price, bring in new readers, let your current readers buy the new release, and you're constantly feeding in new people to that new release and to your whole series. And that works out great. And like I just said, I don't find these days that 99 cents as a permanent price really brings in a ton of readers. I've tried it with several things. I currently still have one book at 99 cents kind of permanently, and it's not at all doing what I had hoped it would do. So I'm going to probably raise those back up to full price and try a different strategy. But different genres are going to perform differently. Different types of books will perform differently. So I recommend that once you start your series, you experiment with different things, and just keep in mind that some things are going to work better than others. And some things will work better for you than they do for other people. And you'll see other people do things and it won't work for you. And that's just the way of being indie. So be flexible, be experimental, and pay attention to what works and what doesn't. If it's working, do more of it. If it's not working, stop doing it. And I think that the biggest challenge with free books is it's hard to pulse price free unless you're in Kindle Unlimited, because with Kindle Unlimited, you can use like 5 free days for your 90-day term. But when you're wide, it's hard enough to get Amazon to price match your book to free. So to get them to shift it back to paid and then back to free when you want can be a little bit of a headache. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's something you need to plan for well in advance, because they won't always switch your book to free. It's not like you can just manually switch your book at Amazon, which makes it a little bit challenging the way you can do at other places. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're developing your strategy. All right, you guys, that is all I have for our second and final series Q&A. I sincerely hope that you have gotten a lot from not only the Q&As, but from this entire video series. If you did enjoy it, I sincerely hope that you will not only like this video, but subscribe to this channel and share this series as well as my How to Plot a Novel series or any of the other series I've shared here on YouTube with your writer friends, so that they can also hopefully join our community and be part of our Hardies group here on YouTube. And that is all I have. But there is so much more to come. Starting next week, we will be starting some fun Preptober goodies, getting ready for NaNoWriMo to start in November. I'm going to have some free downloads for you if you're on my mailing list, some checklists, some word count trackers, and other really great tips for how to get prepared for Nano, how to win Nano, how to organize your book, how to plot your book, and all of that great stuff. So I hope that you will come and hang out with me. I'm also hoping to do daily vlogs for NaNoWriMo, keeping up with my word count. So that is going to be super fun. And then of course we have the end of the year where we'll be talking about how to plan for an amazing 2021, how to plan your writing schedule, and how to set up your goals. So I hope that you'll join me for all that great content. Be sure to comment down below with which of these tips or any other series questions that you have, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.